Well, this morning on Media and Society, we talk about South Africa's water crisis. What is it that the media can do to help the public understand it in order for us to save water? Also on the show this morning, journalists see some horrific things while on the job. So this morning we chat about their mental health and well-being. And we also discuss the upcoming investigative journalism conference at Wits University. Well, hello and welcome to Media and Society on SABC News, independent and impartial. My name is Naledi Muleo, and this is where we look at the intersection between media and audiences. And of course, as usual, this show is not complete without your say, so do connect with us via our social media channels and share your views and concerns about how the media works and what we feed you. Use hashtag SABC Media Society or give us a call on 011-714-0661 or 0662. Well, we start here. In the last few weeks, there's been a massive spotlight on the water crisis in Gauteng, with taps running dry in parts of the capital, in Pretoria, and parts of the country's financial hub, Johannesburg. But many South Africans rely on water tankers from time to time. This is water would be cut off, leading to even protests that we've seen in some areas. In fact, as far back as 2017, residents of New Forest and Bushbuck Ridge held protests to say that they'd been begging for water for a number of years. And then when you look at what's coming out of KwaZulu-Natal, where floods in the province added to the water crisis as contamination after the storm was blamed for water cuts this year. And then, of course, remember the rush to avoid day zero in the Western Cape. So this morning on Media and Society, we're asking, is there anything that the media can do to educate the public so we can avoid a water shortage catastrophe in the country? Let's take a look at this package that focused on the Johannesburg water crisis.
Joburg Water requires a cash injection of 100 billion rand to upgrade its water infrastructure.
This is not really about water shortage. It's really about the inability to pump the water as a result of the structures not responding, either through power shortages or some of the glitches that could have been there. But there is sufficient water.
The move follows interruptions at a bulk supplier in Vereniging, which was caused by a series of power outages. The temporary disturbance is said to have negatively impacted pumps at some reservoirs.
We actually require 2,500 kiloliters per hour for us to be able to get our reservoir to operate at optimal level. So with that power interruption that happened, the reservoirs for bulk supplier went low, which effectively affected our reservoirs as well.
City Power says the reservoirs which it supplies electricity to are exempt from load shedding. It's attributed the power outages to vandalism, theft and aging infrastructure.
We are able to isolate during load shedding, and we ensure that their power is kept on. But in the period that the MD of Water is talking to, which is the outages that were there, I believe there were a total of about 6 outages in that point. Only one of the outages is from City Power side.
Meanwhile, residents are urged to exercise patience while the system is under pressure. This at a time when demand is high due to a heat wave and little rainfall. Mbalenhle Mthethwa, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Give us a call on the number 011-714-0661 or 0662, or on Twitter use hashtag SABC Media and Society. And I'm keen to hear your thoughts on really how we educate South Africans better about saving water and what it is that you'd like to see done about the water crisis. But I'm talking now specifically about what the media can do to bring that education to the fore so that we can all take some responsibility for it as well. Joining me in this discussion, of course, is Ruth Beekman, who is the Freshwater Policy lead at WWF South Africa. Ruth, a good morning to you. We're joined by Puleng Mopedi, the spokesperson for Johannesburg Water, also here in studio with us. And we're also joined by Professor Johan Tempelhoff, who leads the research team working at Cultural Dynamics of Water at Northwest University. Thank you so much for joining us. A critical discussion. And I think, Puleng, I want to start with you because naturally here in Gauteng, you have the most pressure on you. We've got that package that essentially explains why we have this water crisis. But can you explain it a little bit further? You know, how much of it is linked to even the load shedding that we have seen?
Thank you, Naledi. And I think the load shedding is a national crisis, and the it's an energy crisis that we're facing as a country. And Johannesburg is not immune to it. And this is what we've seen in the past month. From the 23rd of September, where our bulk supplier experienced some water outages. And people don't understand that water is linked to power somehow, because we're using pumps in terms of pumping this water to reach our residents. So I think that's what we need to the agenda setting as far as the media is concerned. We need to educate people that there are links between these two, and if we do not have power, then water is impacted.
Yeah, and I mean that trickle-down effect has been cited over and over again. Ruth, if I bring you in here and say, well, as WWF and as environmental activists, we know, and we say this all the time, that South Africa is a water-scarce country. So surely you might not be very surprised that we find ourselves in this position.
Absolutely, thank you. Indeed, we are a water-scarce country, and we need to work very carefully with our water. And I like the point that you've raised up front, that water and energy is linked. Water is linked to absolutely every sector, and you know we are facing also climate risk threats. Climate change risks. So we need to understand that when climate impacts on us, it impacts primarily through water. So we know that in South Africa and in the SADC region generally, that you have water that is not equally distributed. Nature doesn't work like that. And so we've got so much inequity and so much unequal distribution that it really comes to an issue of how we manage water. We may have water scarcity, but the issue is water management, water governance, water infrastructure. Those are the challenges. How much consumption of water? So there are a number of different aspects that are important here. But I think in this particular crisis with Gauteng, we really need to look. We didn't have physical water scarcity. That wasn't the issue this time. There was water, the dam, the Vaal Dam, and the supply system. There was adequate water. So it came back to that issue of how do we work with the physical resource, the people resource, the governance, and also the infrastructure, and how we move that water from nature, because the water was there.
I think there's something to be said as well, Ruth, and you touched on this a little bit earlier when you also talked about, you know, it is the infrastructure and the governance, but you've also talked about consumption, and I think that's something we're going to get into a lot as well over the next few minutes. But Prof, I want to bring you in here. You've written, you've done some work, and you've essentially put forward this assertion in your work that in the near future, water is going to cost us the same as oil. That's a frightening thought, Prof. Explain why you say that.
Well, it's obvious as we move into the era of renewable energy, the demand for fossil fuels will start declining, and automatically it implies that there will be a far more focused demand for oil, and it will be used far more carefully than is the case at present. So I can see this transition taking place by probably 2035, and that's what the experts are saying. And also we will be moving in the direction of hydrogen energy, which can be completely renewable energy.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot for us to touch on there, but I want to bring it back to now the role of the media. And Puleng, I bring you in here again as spokesperson of Joburg Water. you have the difficult task of coming out to the media and speaking to us essentially and saying to the public, well, this is where we're at. We're going to have to cut, or at least to shed some water every now and then, or at least decrease water pressure. And it's a difficult task that you've got here that you need to deliver to the city. And you get pushback, but there's the request that you make for people to also be careful with their water usage. Are you getting buy-in with the work that you have to do, Puling?
From the communities, no. And I think with the relationships that we build with the media, we are getting there. We have limited resources in terms of getting the message out there, because Johannesburg Water, we're using only social media, and obviously we rely on the media interviews and so forth to send out the message out there. The only issue that we have is that the people are not receptive of the current situation that we're facing as the country, and not only as Johannesburg. And when you say, please use water sparingly, they are not receptive to that. They said the Valdam is we have a lot of engineers in the city, and they're looking at those kind of things, that the Valdam is full. Why do we have to use water sparingly? And they're not looking at what will happen in the future. I mean, water usage and water consumption, it's a global issue. It's not only a Johannesburg water issue, or Johannesburg or Gauteng in particular, but then they are just not receptive. And I think we need to penetrate into the communities to say the reason that why we are here, it's not only because the Valdam is full, but then the consumption is the problem. And that's why we find ourselves responding to Rand Water's curtailment of water, where we are restricting some of our reservoirs and towers to say, let's limit the usage because there is high demand, and then the consumption is also high. So when the media works with us as Johannesburg Water, be it interviews, be it going out there with us to see the situation on the ground, I think the message will then be clear to the communities to say water consumption, water reduction, it's a serious issue.
Yeah, we've been running these visuals now on the screen, and we've just cut them off, of people collecting water when there is a water crisis, and there they are. South Africans going out in buckets to be able to have water so that they can cook and take care of the bare minimum. These aren't people that are going to step into a bathtub and fill it up with foam bath to use water. These are people that desperately need it for their daily lives. But when we send out that message, I'm staying with you now, Puling, when we send out that message and we say reduce water shortage, are we talking to the right people?
We are talking to the right people. Naledi, I'll make an example. Yesterday on our social media platform, somebody posted a picture of a person, not these visuals, a picture of the person. We've been having rain from Friday, and on a Saturday morning, somebody is using a hose pipe. In the suburban areas. So our message is across the city, be it the 1.9 million households that we're feeding with water, and these also, as well as those who we are feeding through, or supplying rather, through water tankers. So we're talking to everybody, be it though, because not all the reservoirs and towers are restricted. But then when you look at our restriction template, we're restricting meters from Midrand until Soweto because we know the issues that we have as the city.
Yeah. Ruth, I'm going to bring you in here.
Yes.
Again, the focus of our discussion really is the role of media, because we can talk about the water crisis, and I think we've been doing so for weeks on end. But really, I want to talk about the messaging that we need to get right so that people can also come to the party and assist in saving water in one way or another. Is that something that we're failing to do, to communicate the role that everyone can play? I'm going to bring you in here. I mean, look at, for instance, Day Zero in the Western Cape, the massive media campaign that we saw in the Western Cape to get the province on board to save water, and they were able to avoid Day Zero.
Absolutely. So definitely, the stakeholders out there have a role to play, and it's who are all those stakeholders? There's the general public, there's government, there's institutions such as ourselves that have a critical role to play in not only working closely with the media and getting the right messaging out, but I like your point about who are we taking the message to. But in our messaging, I think we need to be very clear what the issues are. There's understanding and appreciation of why we're having these challenges, and then there's also what is it that we can do to play our role to try and alleviate the challenges. But we all need to take responsibility for something that we can all contribute to. So we like to work in partnerships. But you know, there's something so important to this whole conversation, and that is we need to appreciate better, and the media can help us with this also, and we have been working with the media, that when we have a water crisis, we feel it because the taps run dry.
Yes.
But actually that water, we like to say as WWF, water doesn't come from a tap. Water actually comes from the mountain catchments. And we need to make sure that people, the general public, institutions, decision makers understand that the water that we see, the treated end product in the tap, actually we're dependent on the mountain catchments. So in Gauteng's case, we're dependent on the Northern Drakensberg strategic water source area and the Maloti Drakensberg. We get water from Lesotho, we know this. But the important thing is that we must link that mountain catchment water that produces so much water for South Africa. It's a tiny percentage of the land. 8% of the land produces 50% of the water in South Africa. So our messaging, you know, linking nature, linking natural infrastructure to the built infrastructure. We need to manage the whole chain of water. But I don't want to take away responsibility from the end user and from the built infrastructure side of things on the pipes, because like I said, even if we had water in nature, we need to treat, we need to transport, and the problem in this particular case is our old infrastructure. So we need to, you know, there's bursting pipes. We've had it in Gauteng frequently. The burst pipes, or in this particular case, it was the reservoirs were not full. But there's so many different challenges, but we can play our role as citizens, as the media, as government, as NGOs, and as financiers to all play our role in this. But the messaging is key. What is it, you know, because we need to appreciate that water does not come from a tap, that we all have a role to play in linking the water from nature to the water in the pipes. And there's so many millions. If people knew that 9 billion rand per year was lost in terms of water, because we do not charge for that water, it's lost through leakages. That's a lot of money. If people knew those kinds of statistics, we would all think, oh my goodness, that leak, that burst pipe out there that we see is hugely important, because actually it's costing us 9 billion rand a year. Those are the kinds of, I think it's the way we message in terms of, you know, how do we translate those scientific facts, or what we know as scientists, or as government decision makers, and as universities. How do we actually translate that information into the correct messages that's going to get the attention of people? But we all have a responsibility to act.
Yeah, and I think as part of that messaging that you're talking about, Ruth, is what you've, I mean, there's a simple sentence that you've used there: water does not come from taps. That already, you know, in terms of how you message things and communicate something to a community, that certainly grabs my attention, and I want to know then where does it come from? Prof, I'm going to bring you in here, because I think there's something to be said there about how we communicate the message of how desperate the water crisis really is and can be in South Africa. You've done it well. It could cost us the same as oil in the future. It's a frightening statement, but it works.
Right, Naledi. Right at the outset, it was mentioned that people have connected on social media to this program, and they're watching, and you're waiting for comments. So I think what we need to take note of is the diversity of social media and the messages being transmitted. It's diverse, and it leads to extremities. But there's one way of influencing it. We need a comprehensive advertising strategy by the authorities to get involved in social media advertising on water and water scarcity. And there has to be a consistent renewal in the advertising campaign. Marketing water is extremely important, especially on social media. On television, it's easier, and also on the internet as usual. But we need to have a concerted strategy, I think, by the government authorities. Funding needs to be channeled in the direction of transmitting consistent messaging that is constantly renewed. Your water institutions like Joburg Water, Rand Water, and the Department of Water and Sanitation, they can give us quantum information on what is the status of the dams, etc., and our resources. But we need to speak to individuals when we communicate on social media, and that can come across also on radio, television, very powerful media of communication, and also the internet.
Yeah. Well, let's take your calls, and thanks for that, Prof. Let's take calls, 011-714-0661. You can be part of the conversation as well. And talk to us about what you think can be done to really share the message more clearly with our residents in Gauteng and in other parts of the country as well, where we are seeing shortages. How do we get that message across that we all have a responsibility to play where it comes to saving our water? We do have a caller on the line. We've got Nish in West Rand. Nish, good morning to you.
Good morning, my dear.
Yes, thanks for calling. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts is that we've always been short of water in South Africa. I'm 78 years old. I've been living in Johannesburg for 61 years. And the problem in South Africa, we always have it. What I think, my opinion is, I'm not an expert, but as a man that's been involved in the food industry for most of my life, we need water for everything. For farming, for baking,
yeah,
right? For cooking, for sanitation, for washing, for keeping the country beautiful like it is. We need big reservoirs. But first thing that we have to fix, I think, is the infrastructure.
Okay. Yeah. Let me ask you this though, Mish, because you're talking now about the issue of the water itself, and I'm really wanting to focus on whether or not there is enough communication to you as a member of the public about the water crisis, and also ways that you can use perhaps to save water. Do you think that's being communicated sufficiently?
It's absolutely necessary for everybody to save water. Absolutely necessary. Having a shower once every second day is good enough. And you don't have to use more than 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And not 50 minutes in the shower. I'm not having a full bath. It's not necessary.
Okay. Yeah, Mish, thank you so much for calling. We really, really appreciate it. Still taking more calls on 011-714-0661. Qondile is on the line in Mangaung. Qondile, good morning to you.
Morning, Naledi, and to your guests. Naledi, I think you are raising important questions as to whether the information that goes to communities is sufficient or one. But I want to raise something quickly, Naledi, that relates to water demand management and conservation. This is the strategy that was outlined by the national government way back. And I'm sure if we can really implement that strategy where they are talking about the demand of water, how should we really put on those messages out there, but also how do we best handle the communication to rural areas, because some of the metros are semi-rural and they cannot have access to your social media and what all the time. So that for me, the demand strategy was very important in a sense that it gets sanitized all the time to suit the demands of the day, because fact of the matter is that water demand will always be a problem. Water infrastructure in terms of supplying water to communities will always be a problem. So it would need a really joint responsibility amongst the stakeholders in the water sector itself. Because for me, if you look at the demand now, it's higher than what we provide as municipalities because of lack of infrastructure and the challenges of demand. People would irrigate when it's not necessary. So those messages and the joint programs are very important.
Let me stay with you, Kondile, because, you know, if you know Kondile, you know that Kondile is essentially a spokesperson as well in Mangaung, working for government, doing amazing work for many years as well. But Kondile, then when you talk about the demand management, I'm keen to hear then how you communicate the water crisis in an area when you do have the different pockets where you have a community that simply hasn't had water for years or goes weeks or months on end without water, and then still come back and say to them, well, we have a water shortage generally, and still be able to go into the suburbia and communicate the message of a water shortage. I mean, how do you strike that balance in between meeting those that desperately need it and those that have it and perhaps maybe wasting it?
Well, for me, Naledi, it is the diverse messages that we have to come up with as communicators. But also, we need to make sure that the back offices, meaning our system as municipalities, is geared towards delivering services. For example, we have other areas in the city where you'd have problems of water, like of Wepener and so. So we're trying to make sure that, one, it is not ideal to have trucks all the time. The municipality has to make sure that at some point there's infrastructure that delivers water every day in those areas. But unfortunately, the situation is such that we need to make sure that those trucks, as you see on the screen, are there to deliver water, whilst the back office, Naledi, it's dealing with a permanent solution of making sure that there's proper infrastructure that is going there. Okay. But what we do not understand, Naledi, is that the reality is that the maintenance of the underground infrastructure has been a problem in a number of municipalities, and this is where the national government, together with local government, have to really apply their mind and make sure that the issue of underground infrastructure is a problem. Because in Mangaung only, for example, we are seated with a problem that would amount to almost 8 billion if we were to deal with the demands of the underground infrastructure. So it tells you that we'll have to juxtapose and come up with creative ways of supplying people with water whilst dealing with the permanent solution.
Kondile, thank you so much for calling in. You see, you're calling out some interesting numbers that they might very well be needed an 8 billion rand budget to fix the underground infrastructure in Mangaung just on water. It's that kind of communication that brings in the investment from the community, even invites lobbyists then to lobby for that project to get going. Let's hear from Peter in Johannesburg. Good morning to you, Peter.
Yeah, good morning.
Thank you so much for calling. What are your thoughts?
The largest users of water is agriculture. They are the largest wasters of water because agriculture is not keeping up with the latest technology in agriculture. The other thing is that the leaks, water leaks, are a principal waster of water, but there's no messaging to specific messaging to agriculture, to business, because they are the largest users of water. Water for human consumption is third on the list. Now, also, we need to calibrate our messaging to the different sectors of water users. And the primary messaging should be directed to young people who are quite influential.
All right.
And I cannot end this call without reminding Joburg Water that in 2005, I brought a technology to South Africa to to repair pipes in situ.
Okay.
And we presented to Mokgale City and to Joburg Water. 2 white guys came from Joburg Water. They were not interested. And my technology partners went back to Atlanta.
Right.
Because no municipality was interested.
So obviously there was a problem in the process there where innovation was being introduced or, at least presented to Joburg Water by yourselves. Thank you so much for calling, and I hope that you'll continue to keep knocking on that door. I am unfortunately out of time, but I want to get closing thoughts from my guests quickly. Professor Johan Tempelhoff, for you, closing thoughts. I mean, what South Africans really need to be thinking about? I think you can speak to any of the stakeholders, whether it be the public, Joburg Water, or the environmentalists, but what we need to do to slow the process down of a water catastrophe, or at least subvert it altogether.
Well, what we have to realize is that Sub-Saharan Africa at present is the region of the world where people are urbanizing at the fastest rate. And the consequence is that our futures will be situated in urban areas. And as we become mega cities, which I think Gauteng City already is, with a population of 17 million people that constitute roughly 25% of South Africa's population. When we look at the urban water crisis, we have to realize that this is a collective issue that needs to be addressed. And what is amazing to me is in rural areas, people know how to use water hygienically and carefully. But as soon as we move into urban areas, we start wasting it.
Yeah.
We do not know and we do not appreciate the scarcity of that resource we are using. And that doesn't augur well for the future, because already water outages have the effect that it leads to critical issues of people going out in protest, and that can turn violent. And also what happens is that it feeds into a black market of trade,
right,
as emerged in Zimbabwe and Kenya already. And that is what we do not want, because all water is supposed or intended to be free for all South Africans to consume, and it has to be of a sound quality. So we need to start focusing on those issues if we need to be responsible in our water consumption. And
100%.
Again, I say, we need communications.
Yeah, we really, really do. Prof, thank you so much for speaking to us. Professor Johan Tempelhoff, who leads the research team working on cultural dynamics of water at Northwest University. Ruth, before I let you go, I mean, closing thoughts on really pushing the messaging and perhaps some words that you'd like to share with water authorities that are watching.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes, I think the key message from my side in terms of closing thoughts is let's work together more in partnerships. Let's support and work with the utilities, the government decision makers, the universities, the NGOs that are out there in the field implementing with stakeholders in the rural landscapes, in the urban landscape. Let's work together in partnership to package our messages appropriately. And I'm going to package one thing for you and the viewers out there, just to say, let's remember the 6 I's, because all of us need the 6 I's. And the 6 I's, the letter I, we need integrated investments that are inclusive, and we need these investments in information, and that relates to your communication. Information, institutions, that's about the governance and all how our institutions also work together. And the last one is infrastructure. And my last thing to honor the mountain catchments and the built cities that are struggling, we need to link the built infrastructure with the ecological infrastructure, the natural infrastructure in the mountains.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Thank you so much for your time, Ruth Beekman, the Freshwater Policy Lead at WWF South Africa. Buleng, quickly, as we wrap up, you are the spokesperson of Johannesburg Water. What's the next challenge for you in getting the message out of where we are?
Naledi, I think both the Prof and Ruth have said a mouthful to say we all have a role to play as government, as the society, as well as everybody has a role to play in terms of water reduction. So my last words is we all have a role to play. Let's conserve water. Let's work together with government, with utilities, and we will see we can make a better city to live in.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Puleng Mopedi, spokesperson there for Johannesburg Water, and a very insightful discussion, and we can continue it on Twitter. Use hashtag SABC Media Society. Share your thoughts on how you'd prefer better communication on the water crisis and perhaps more campaigning to remind us how to save water. It is, after all, access to water, after all, a basic human right, but we all also have the responsibility of protecting that human right. Let's take a short break. More from media and society on the other side of this. Welcome back. So, from violent crime in South Africa to terror attacks on the continent, and even coming face to face with death at the height of the COVID-19, it is no surprise that journalists do suffer mental health issues. And apart from this, newsrooms have also been laying off in the last few years, which also affects the mental well-being of journalists. Well, today, in the second half of Media and Society, we're discussing the mental health of journalists, and we're doing so with South African National Editors Forum project manager Hopewell Khatebe. We also have SABC health producer Zamaswazi Buthelezi. A lot of her work for the Vital Signs program right here on SABC News took her to the height, to the heart of COVID-19 during the pandemic. Hospital wards where lives were lost daily, and we're also joined by psychiatrist Dr. Kagiso Marungane. Apologies for that, Doctor. A good morning to all of my guests, and thank you so much for joining us. I think I want to start with you, Zama, here in the studio, because you are a journalist here at the SABC. You work on a daily basis with all sorts of stories, and during the pandemic, you came face to face with death all too often. And then we're asked, "Are you okay?" And as journalists, we're supposed to say, "I'm fine," because you've got another story to fill. I mean, just what that period meant for you, and what you thought of when we bring up the topic of mental health.
You know, Naledi, there was just so much confusion. I remember the first time when I went to Bara, I was covering a story there, and then we met a doctor who just said to me, "Don't touch any surface." And I was confused. What is happening? She said, "You know what? This virus stays in the surfaces for 24 hours. You touch it, you've got it, you're gonna be sick." Then I started thinking about my mom at home, who is diabetic. I started thinking about my daughter. I started thinking about my colleagues. But hey, I had to work. So I worked. I was always anxious, especially in the beginning. You go to a ward, you're busy chatting to people, and then you're told, "Please move, this person has tested positive for COVID, the results just came back." And you were just next to this person. You don't know whether you've got it. That is why I kept on saying, you know what, I was never tested for COVID, but somehow I feel that I had COVID at some stage, because I would cough and I would just be in this panic mode, and next thing I'm okay, next thing I'm feeling hot. You know, some of it, I felt it was all in the mind. It was just, I was a mess.
Yeah.
I was a wreck, but I had
to
to
remember that during that trauma, you're on a job. You're working, so you need to hold all of this in and wake up and do it again tomorrow, correct?
Definitely. We were two producers, myself and Wandile. So every week, Wandile is busy this week. While he's busy, I'm already working on my story for next week. And guess what? It was only hospitals. We couldn't go to people's homes because people feared we will bring them COVID. So the only place where we get interviews, where we get case studies, was hospitals. And you're seeing people being wheeled in, people that have passed on. It was so traumatic.
Yeah.
I don't know how I survived it.
And the word is traumatic. And I think if you're a journalist, in any field, you felt trauma in one way or another. Covering the story of an 8-year-old girl who has been raped and killed, and you are the journalist on the ground. That is a traumatic experience that journalists have to deal with on a daily basis and keep it moving. Hopewell, I want to bring you in for this one as well, because you are with the South African National Editors Forum, and of course, you've worked in the field as well. I mean, I want to say war stories, but it's not something funny. But what are some of your stories that take you back to a story that you did that you are convinced led to some kind of trauma in one way or another?
Thank you, my sister. I think the most traumatic thing for us at the office at the South African National Editors Forum was when we were getting calls from journalists who were saying, I've been infected, I'm worried, I feel like I am endangered the lives of my family because of this, of having contracted the illness. What do I do? At the time, we were talking and having a discussion with the Ministry of Health and also the COVID-19 Command Council, and trying to get journalists to be vaccinated first as part of the group that had been declared that they are what you call essential services. Those talks were like taking forever. And at the time, we were counting bodies because some of the families were kind enough to tell us of the journalists that had died of this disease, and others were sick. So it was very traumatic. We felt like we had the fate of all journalists in our hands because of this, and we were just not finding a solution quick enough.
Yeah.
And to us, even the government was just too slow because it wanted to start with the health workers for justifiable reasons, and they were starting with police as well. We felt like we were too far down the line to convince the government that we needed urgent attention for journalists as well.
Yeah, I remember that period very, very well. I remember journalists and police and officials really being the only people on the streets because we had the permits, but we were exposed. We were exposed. But I want to stay with you, Hopewell, on this one, because you've touched on the impact that the pandemic had on journalists, as did Uzama Swazi here in studio. But I also want to talk about just generally, outside of the pandemic, where you have journalists that are on the ground covering crime, gender-based violence, war, what that does to their mental health and what SANEF has noted.
Yeah, this has been traumatic. Remember that in the middle of all this, we have had several what you call elections. We had elections in 2019, we had elections last year. And throughout this process, we were also monitoring the number of incidents where journalists were threatened. Some of them were what you call held hostage in KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga. They were kicked out, and there were many journalists that were robbed, just literally robbed by criminals who took their equipment on gunpoint, you know, and they faced that. I think some of the journalists of the television journalists were shot at in Hillbrow, and their cars had bullet holes, and they had to speed out of that area to save their lives. So for us who are in the cold face looking at all these incidents, and fortunately they get reported to us as well, and we then try and talk to the police to deal with it and try to counter and react quickly. In KwaZulu-Natal, at around Ulundi, journalists were saved by police when they were held hostage by the community there. So all these traumatic incidents, they tend to also kind of affect them. You know, the idea that you'd wake up and with enthusiasm and go to work was beginning to really bring fear to journalists. And this is what we say when we say journalists should work freely, because otherwise we get into that mode of self-censorship and not able to tell the stories of society easily because there is that fear that they will be injured, they would, you know, they will be killed.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring you in, Dr. Marunganye. Apologies for that again. What happens when post-traumatic stress disorder consistently is there and not dealt with, and why is it important for health for journalists to seek out professional help?
Yes, thank you very much, ma'am. It's Dr. Marunganye. But anyway, I think what tends to happen is that obviously, like police officers and healthcare workers, journalists, given the nature of their work, they are going to be exposed to traumas, and some of the traumas that are reported on may be just a microscope of what they really experience on a daily basis. And this trauma, although they were not there when the crime was committed, they see the after effects of it without, before the police come and clear the scene. So that visual appreciation of the scene is traumatic enough for them. What tends to happen afterwards, then you get the stress reactions coming in. Those stress reactions may be sadness, maybe irritability, maybe anger, maybe insomnia, and some of them may even turn into alcohol. What tends to happen is that if these last long enough, a month or so, then that's where you get the acute stress disorder, or you get the post-traumatic stress disorder. The problem with these disorders is that, like with every other mental illness, it can start impacting on the person's function. We're talking socially, we're talking occupationally, and so forth. And then what can happen is that you may find that some journalists may not want to go to work and may report in sick, or they may be absent, and then their performance may also deteriorate, and then people may think that they become not the same award-winning journalists as before, but it's simply because of the trauma that they've experienced.
Yeah, I really wish we had more time for this discussion, truly, because it is such an important one. But I think just as we wrap it up, I know that SANEF has been doing some work with journalists to deal with their mental health. So please do reach out to the South African National Editors Forum. If you are a journalist and you're dealing with addictive behavior, it is a reality in this industry. And of course, do reach out as well for mental health assistance. And I think it's important as well to call for media houses to provide mental health support to workers. I think Zamaswazi, you'd agree with me there. But let's leave it there. Thank you so much to my guests, Dr. Kagiso Maruhanye. Finally got it right. Thanks as well. He's a psychologist, and thanks as well to SABC health producer Zamaswazi Buthelezi, as well as the South African National Editors Forum's project manager, Mr. Hopewell Khadebe. We take a short break. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. So the African Investigative Journalism Conference is taking place at Wits University over the next few days. They'll be discussing the state of investigative journalism and how digital tools impact on it. We, of course, will be bringing you what comes out of that conference next week right here on Media and Society. But the conference kicks off tomorrow at Wits University, and Media and Society will be bringing you some of the role players as they bring you that conference, and also we'll be bringing it to you live on the agenda between 9 and 12 tomorrow on SABC News. It's going to be a really interesting discussion. Perhaps you can share your thoughts as well on how you would want to see the improvement of investigative journalism in South Africa. Let's take a short break. We'll get Professor Anton Harber onto the line in a moment. Right, well, let's chat now about the African Investigative Journalism Conference taking place at Wits University over the next few days. And for that, we're joined now on the line by Professor Anton Harber from the Journalism and Media Studies Department at Wits University. Prof. Harber, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. The importance of a conference like this one that will be kicking off over the next few days.
Thank you very much. You know, we're bringing together about more than 350 journalists from across the continent. At least 42 African countries are represented. So it's the biggest annual gathering of working journalists on the continent. The importance really is two things. The one is we showcase great African work and hopefully put to bed this notion that there isn't powerful and interesting and important investigative work being done across the continent. And the second is that, you know, good investigative work these days is teamwork. It's very collaborative. It's very cross-border. So what we do is we encourage the building of networks among journalists to work together to confront the issues that we need to be investigating.
Yeah, any prominent names that will be in attendance, Prof?
Oh, yes, many, many. Anas Anas, the great Ghanaian journalist. Some really great Kenyan journalists. Charlie Beckett, the sort of leading international expert on newsrooms using artificial intelligence, some really great Norwegian OSINT experts. Those are people who use open source intelligence on the internet to investigate. So there really is some great learning and teaching and sharing and collaboration that will come out of it.
Yeah, and I was going to ask what the outcomes really should be, what you want to see. I want to look a little bit quickly at the themes that you're going to be covering in the discussions. You talked about the need for collaborations. I imagine that the safety of investigative journalists on the continent is going to be a big talking point.
It is a big talking point. We have the Carlos Cardoso Memorial Lecture as part of the conference, where we highlight the call for an end to impunity for those who attack journalists. We have a number of sessions in which we talk about and do training for journalists to be safer, not just physically, but for their data to be safer, their psychological security and safety, and their legal security as well. Yeah. We take a lot of looking at the environment and environmental crime and how to tackle that. Health issues are big on our agenda. Investigating finance and the movement of money and how to access that information is a big theme.
Right.
So there's lots of a very full program.
Yeah, well, like I said, we will be bringing you that conference live tomorrow on the agenda between 9 and 12 right here on SABC News. And of course, we'll bring you a more detailed look at what came out of it as well next week, Sunday, right here on Media and Society. And with that, that's where I leave you. Thank you so much to Professor Anton Harber from the Journalism and Media Studies Department at Wits University. From myself, Naledi Molewa, and the rest of the Media and Society team, have yourselves a fabulous Sunday.